For today's episode, we will be talking about the LGBTQ plus community. We will be discussing the history of the community, as well as explaining different terms used to describe gender and sexuality, and talk about the significance of different LGBTQ plus flags.
Today, we will be hearing from various members of SLAC who will help us better understand the terminology, as well as sharing anonymous stories of CHS students within the LGBTQ community.
We hope that this episode sheds light on the issues facing the LGBTQ community, as well as helps our listeners to become better allies in the struggle for equality.
So throughout today's episode, we're going to refer to the acronym LGBTQIA. And some of you may be wondering, what exactly does that acronym stand for? Well, I've got Dia here who's going to walk us through what each letter stands for, as well as explain to us what each pride flag associated with that group looks like. So Dia, can you start us off? What does the L in LGBTQIA stand for?
Okay, so the L in LGBTQIA stands for lesbian. Lesbians are women who are attracted to women. The lesbian pride flag has different shades of red, orange, pink, and white. This is the most common flag that is used to equally represent lesbians as a whole.
What does the G in the acronym stand for?
G of the acronym stands for gay. A gay man is a man who is attracted to other men specifically. The gay pride flag, which consists of all the colors of the rainbow, is the more modern version of the flag.
So what does the B in the acronym stand for?
The B stands for bisexual. Bisexuality is when someone is attracted to male and female genders. The bisexual pride flag has three colors, pink, purple, and blue.
What about the T?
The T stands for transgender. A transgender person is someone who doesn't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. The transgender pride flag has three colors, light blue, pink, and white.
And how about the Q? What does the Q in the acronym stand for?
Q stands for queer. Queer is an umbrella term for sexual and gender minorities who are not heterosexual or cisgender. Queer doesn't have a pride flag. However, a more inclusive flag would be the Progress Pride flag. It's a combination of all the pride flags and also includes brown and black stripes to symbolize the people of color in the LGBTQIA plus community.
Now, what about the I in LGBTQIA? What does that stand for?
The I stands for intersexual. Intersexuality is someone who is born with both traditionally defined male and female biological features. The intersexual pride flag is a yellow flag with a purple circle in the middle.
So what does the A stand for?
A stands for asexual. Asexuality is when an individual doesn't feel sexual attraction. The asexual pride flag has four colors, black, gray, white, and purple.
And obviously that acronym doesn't encompass the entire queer community spectrum. So there's lots of other identities and things like that aren't mentioned in the acronym, but one that we felt would be important to mention as well would be non-binary. Dia, can you tell us what non-binary means?
A non-binary person is someone who doesn't identify as the male or female gender. They commonly use they/them pronouns. The non-binary pride flag has four colors, yellow, white, purple, and black.
Dia, thank you so much for explaining that to us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. It's important to remember that the LGBTQIA plus community is nothing new. There's a long, rich history of LGBTQIA plus individuals who had a tremendous impact on our world. This history has been erased due to the oppression of LGBTQIA plus people for generations. This episode will be spotlighting the history of a few individuals, some you may even know, in the hopes to remember those who were unjustly forgotten. The first is poet Emily Dickinson.
Emily Dickinson was one of the most famous American poets. She secretly wrote an enormous amount of poetry about her personal life and its mysteries. When she first started writing, her poems started off seemingly simple, and she wasn't writing too many. However, as she grew older, she wrote more about her personal life. Her poems indicated she had a lifelong love affair with her childhood friend, Susan Gilbert. However, later on, Susan married Emily's brother. Throughout her whole life, up to the moment she died, Emily and Susan lived just next door to each other. Many scholars question the relationship they had pertaining to her poetry because it would explain a lot of letters and poems seemingly written by Dickinson to Susan. She wrote 3 infamous steamy love letters addressed to nobody, which were speculated to be intended for Susan, even though their partnership at the time wasn't possible due to social norms in the 1800s. Still, though, it is impossible to really know the full extent of their relationship.
In this next segment, we discuss the differences between various terms to understand when discussing LGBTQIA+ identity.
What is biological sex?
Biological sex is the sex you were born with, which has to do with your biology and biological functions, and it's important for medical professionals to know. What is gender and gender identity?
Gender and gender identity is the gender you identify as, male, female, neither, or both, and has to do with your brain. There is scientific proof of people identifying with a gender they are not assigned at birth.
What does the word transitioning mean?
Transitioning is a process where a person socially and medically becomes the gender they identify with.
What is gender expression?
According to social norms, how a person outwardly shows their identity based on clothing, hairstyle, or mannerisms. This is often a way for individuals to express and feel comfortable with their gender identity, even if they haven't transitioned fully.
What is gender dysphoria?
It is a medically diagnosable condition when one's gender and sex do not match up. Gender dysphoria creates horrible feelings, causing discomfort and hatred of their body due to biological traits not aligning with their gender identity. What does GNC mean?
GNC stands for gender nonconforming, which means people whose gender identity isn't very simple or doesn't conform to traditional gender behaviors or expressions.
What does gender fluid mean?
Gender fluidity is when someone doesn't have a fixed gender identity and may identify as multiple genders.
Next, we'll discuss the life of Albert Dj Cashier, a Civil War soldier and one of the earliest recorded transgender American citizens.
Born in 1843 by the name of Jenny Irene Hodgers, Albert Dj Cashier grew up in Ireland as a woman for the beginning of his life. In 1862, though, he had attempted to join the military. Because at the time the military only consisted of men, Cashier had disguised himself as a man to enlist and fight. He did this for about 3 years before returning to civilian life. However, instead of returning to life as a woman, Cashier continued to live the rest of his life in society as a man. Although there is speculation, many believe Cashier remained a man even after leaving the military because he was one of the earliest transgender figures in history.
Next, SLAC President Kylie will read an anonymous story from a CHS student.
It took me a couple days to write this because I kept going back and forth and deciding if I wanted to share my personal experience about questioning sexuality because it is such an intimate part of my life that not even my closest friends really know about. For context, I identify as bisexual now, even though I don't like labels, and I've known that I definitely wasn't straight for a while. However, only a couple of people know, and I would never even dream of telling my parents. Even though I know my parents love me, I think them growing up with internalized negative beliefs on the LGBTQ+ community has them stuck in a homophobic mindset. Also, being a closeted bisexual, it can feel really crappy and invalidating to hear uneducated and unsupportive views on your own sexuality. Specifically, being bisexual, it is really hard to even feel validated by the community and other people in general because you are either straight and looking for attention or you are gay and in denial. It's really hurtful to hear unsupportive views like this, especially from my parents, because I am not out to them and they already have these negative opinions, so it makes it harder for me to try and even think to open up in the future. Overall, though, I wanted to tell my story because I wish I had someone to relate to when I first started to question my sexuality and kind of felt like the oddball among my peers. I think it is really important for the topic of sexuality to be normalized and that everyone can feel comfortable talking about whether it is with friends or family. I don't really know how to end this because my story isn't over. It's something that is a part of my everyday life, and I think that if you don't have to worry about your sexuality constantly, you can kind of forget that others around you may be struggling with something you wouldn't even think twice about.
Now, SLAC President Hivza will read an anonymous story from a CHS student.
As someone who is asexual, the worst backlash I receive is when people choose to label me as immature, invalidating my identity. I've known for years now that I was asexual, so for someone to tell me that they know me better than I know myself is ridiculous. I once had a teacher suggest that asexuality isn't real. Although this teacher didn't know my identity, that doesn't justify their opinion. I took it with a grain of salt and didn't let it affect me. However, it was so disrespectful since I had already spent years hating myself as a result of my asexuality. Considering I was raised Catholic, I grew up with the impression that I'm supposed to eventually have a family and pass my religion down to my children. Due to this mentality, I felt really ashamed for being asexual. When people talk about overcoming differences, everyone always brings up how we all love and have the capability for love. I started to feel such a disconnect from society when I was initially finding out who I was because I apparently couldn't love. After sitting through homilies with pastors condemning the LGBTQIA+ community or hearing people close to me suggest asexuality is just immaturity or a psychopathic symptom, I absolutely hated my identity. These days, I'm extremely nonchalant about who I am. My asexuality is just another descriptor, and although it comes with its stereotypes, it doesn't mean anything. Being part of the LGBTQIA+ community has emphasized to me that a label or characteristic only means as much as you want it to mean. While I've spent a lot of time wishing I was straight and hoping I could be normal, I realized that hating myself over something I can't change is pointless. I doubt I'll ever come out to my family, but I'm out to everyone else. Personally, I don't care that I won't ever share this part of me with my parents, but I hope that our society becomes more accepting as a whole.
Our next profile is on Sylvia Rivera, a trans activist during the 1970s LGBTQIA+ civil rights revolution.
Sylvia Rivera was born in 1951 and passed away in 2002. She was an advocate and activist for the rights of people of color and people in the LGBTQIA community. She wanted to help those who were discriminated against and hated for being themselves. Sylvia wanted to show them how to express themselves and be happy. She fought against those who didn't include others, like the exclusion of transgender people from the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act in New York. She worked hard and tirelessly for what she believed in to make the world a better place for everyone.
Our next historical profile is on poet Gloria E Anzaldua.
Born in 1942, Gloria E Anzaldua was known for her poetry and writings. Her works mostly centered around feminist and queer poetry. Some of her works, such as Borderlands or La Frontera, the New Mestiza, and This Bridge Called My Back, writings by radical women of color, were considered groundbreaking to feminist, queer, and cultural worlds. A main theme in her writing challenged the notion of sexuality and explored her complicated relationship with her own sexuality. Over her writing career, Anzaldua won many awards for her work and helped to address the many misconceptions that came with the LGBTQ+ community at the time.
Now a few members of Slack are going to address a few frequently asked questions if you want to be an effective ally to the LGBTQIA+ community.
What should I do when I find out somebody I know is part of the LGBTQIA+ community?
When talking to a gay person, never say, "I would have never expected you to be gay." It's not a compliment and further adds to the narrative that gay people have to look a certain way.
Once you find out someone is a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, try to avoid only talking to them about their sexuality or gender identity.
What are some other words or phrases I should avoid?
Do not call people by their birth given name, especially when they have changed it or prefer to be called something else.
Avoid using the word homosexual to refer to those attracted to the same sex because it is used aggressively, suggesting that gay people are different or like a disease.
Do not refer to a transgender person as a he, she, she-male, or it.
Some words to avoid: fag, faggot, dyke, homo.
Avoid referring to someone or something as gay or the phrase "that's so gay" because it normalizes discrimination and typically is of negative connotation.
Avoid words and phrasing such as transgendered, a transgender, transgenders, transvestite, or tranny because transgender is an adjective and not a noun. Correct terms are transgender, transgender people, a transgender person.
Avoid the term transgenderism because it's used to dehumanize transgender people and belittle who they are to a condition.
If I talk about a relationship between people of the same sex, do I call them gay?
Do not call any relationship, activity, or feeling gay if you wouldn't refer to it as straight when speaking. Example, gay couple, gay relationship. This is to help build acceptance for all types of relationships and avoid making them seem different. Don't refer to anybody in an LGBTQ relationship as the man or the woman in the relationship.
Is it appropriate to ask a trans person about their medical history?
Never ask someone who identifies as trans if they had the surgery yet. It implies that to identify as trans, you must undergo medical procedures, and that is just inappropriate.
Can I ask a trans person what their old name was?
Although it might seem like you're just being curious, don't ask a trans person what their name was before they transitioned. Some don't mind, but usually they like to leave the past behind them.
Do not call people by their birth given name, especially when they changed it or prefer to be called something differently. Additionally, avoid using terms like biological male when referring to a person who does not identify with the birth given sex, as well as biological female, as well as born man or born a woman. If necessary for any medical reason, it is most appropriate to refer to the birth given sex as assigned male, female at birth, but is a woman, man.
The fight for LGBTQIA plus equality has happened everywhere, from the halls of state houses to school buildings. One such case is the story of Jamie Nabonzi, whose story led to equality protections for LGBTQIA plus students.
Jamie Nabonzi was 13 when he was forced to become homeschooled after being bullied by his peers for his girlish appearance. After moving in with his aunt and uncle to continue his schooling from home, Jamie had come out as gay to his aunt. The negative reaction of his aunt, stemming from her strict religious background, led Jamie running away. When reporting his appearance to the authorities, his sexuality was added to the police as well as his parents. He would eventually return to his family along with public school. His return to middle school, though, was met with bullying and name-calling from his peers because of his sexuality. Although his counselor tried to intervene, the bullying continued. In 1996, Jamie filed a lawsuit against his school district and won. The court ruled that public schools and their officials could be held liable for failing to protect students from anti-gay harassment and harm. This is a landmark decision in terms of LGBTQ+ rights.
This is Mr. Long, and I'm going to be reading an anonymous story from a CHS student. I identify as bisexual. The struggle I'm going through right now is the fact that most of my family is homophobic. So basically, I can't tell anyone at all. It's very frowned upon in my religion, so I would never tell any of them because I can't. It's also really hard mentally when you have this huge secret your parents don't know about. Sometimes I get really low, only because sometimes it eats you up. I don't expect you all to understand this, but it's harder when all around you hear things like, they're going to hell, or these people are crazy. But seriously, they're very close-minded people who don't understand the LGBTQIA plus community at all, or mental health. And sometimes I sit back and I just think I'm literally everything my parents are against. It's a huge struggle for me too. And I just wanted to share this with you, so if you're also feeling this way, know that you're not alone. To close out this episode, CHS student Vanessa will share her story.
All of us have a background and a unique story to tell. We have something meaningful to share that differentiates us from others. My whole life story is not one that is typical or common to many. My upbringing, conflicts, my ups and downs all have molded me to the person I am today. Born in Perth Amboy on February 9th was me, Vanessa Batista, but it wasn't always this way. As a child, my favorite thing to do was dress up in my mom's clothes. Growing up wasn't that bad, but there were some issues. I always fit in with the girls perfectly, but like I mentioned before, I wasn't always the person I am today. I was born biologically male, and at the time, I was still a boy. The teachers would have to correct me because I wasn't a girl, and when we played dress up, I took on more of the female role, which in turn I was scolded for because it was wrong. This whole situation was so hard. As a child, you don't know how to express yourselves. My parents at the time saw it as wrong and thought I was just going through a phase. They tried to turn me into the stereotypical boy direction. The situation kind of calmed down during primary school when we learned more instead of played. Since we had to wear uniforms, it was not too much of a problem because girls and boys kind of wore the same thing. The hardest part was probably being separated during gym or recess because I would have to stay with the boys and do boy things. Once we were watching TV and something about Caitlyn Jenner appeared and my dad said it was wrong, gross, and that being transgender is a sin and all this negative stuff. And he was relieved he didn't have a son like that. In 7th grade, I had some mental issues that prevented me from doing gym. During that period, I would sit in detention room on my Chromebook. One day, I remember vividly searching up transgender just out of curiosity. So as you may expect, I see Caitlyn Jenner again. This made me wonder more. So I searched up the exact definition of transgender, and it stated, relating to person whose sense of personal identity and gender do not correspond with their birth-given sex. So I looked deeper into it and searched up things like how to know if I'm transgender or transgender female on YouTube. I was shocked to see how many girls were just like me that went through similar situations. I spoke to my English teacher at the time, and she told me about a student counselor from Colonia who comes to our school. I was very hesitant, but agreed to meet with her. Miss Giordano was the first person to ever really hear about my issues. High school came around and my anxiety was skyrocketing. Going to a new school with new kids who don't know me was very terrifying. Freshman year, I started looking into natural ways of feminizing myself, things like soy and estrogen-rich products. It helped a good amount physically. Freshman year was hard because it was full of new kids, so I didn't want to stick out too much. Sophomore year, I still didn't completely go by a girl, but I presented almost full-time as a girl and started to dress really feminine. Now I have come such a long way. I present full-time as a girl. I am starting hormones soon and starting a new chapter in my life. My parents are both my number one supporters, and everything I went through really showed me how to work hard for what I want and was all worth it towards the end.
Thank you for listening to the Student-Led Action Podcast. Special thanks for this episode to Christia, Vanessa, Gianna, Dia, Nicola, Salma, Ashley, Sophia, Heshwin, and Gracie for their research and their voiceovers. And of course, thank you to our Slack presidents, Hivza and Kylie. We'll see you next time.